webcast, all participants will be emailed a copy of today's presentation. We will take questions at the end of the presentation, which you can send using your chat window. All participants will be muted so that so please use this function to ask questions. Now, moving along, I'd like to turn things over to Steve Burgess.
Thank you, Mary Beth. My name is Steve Burgess. I'm with Guidant Partners. We're a managed IT services firm in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been involved with the IT industry since 1983, and I've been the CEO of Guidant Partners since 1988. I appreciate the invitation by Century2 to speak to you today. We are pleased to be one of their clients and happy to be part of this educational webinar series. Having been in the IT industry for over 30 years, I will not attempt to highlight all the different areas and companies I have experienced helping. What I will reflect on is that I have seen many changes. Change is about the only thing we have seen consistent in our industry, and that is why I spend so much time working with our clients to help them see the impact of IT on their businesses. Most businesses today have a common problem when it comes to IT. Their revenue streams are significantly, if not entirely, tied to their IT systems. Companies who are not embracing and managing IT as a strategic part of their business are at risk, and this is what we do. We help people develop strategic plans for managing their IT infrastructures and systems. So let's look at our agenda today and what we're going to cover. Just quickly, the fact that we want to look at the industries most affected by security incidents, some statistics about the risk for small businesses, and the fact that it's not just the targets and the big clients of the world or big companies. We're all at risk. And what we can do through policies to protect ourselves, some insights about how to avoid and address the cybersecurity threats, and how to honestly assess your security postures so that we're not becoming a victim. And again, at the end of this, we'll follow up with questions and answers. So as we look at the 5 simple ways to protect our data, and we go through the presentation, there's 2 things I'm asking you to do when you're listening to this and watching this. Think of it from 2 perspectives. As an individual on a personal level, and as a business from how I would protect my company. And understanding what data does represent. At the end of the day, if you really stop and think about how much information technology has been integrated into our businesses, data represents my company. It represents my reputation. It represents my ability to interact with my clients and vendors. As you know, I look back over the last 30 years of working with our clients at Guidant Partners, I've seen how information technology, use maybe not good grammar, but it snuck into our businesses. And one day we woke up and we realized, you know, information, data, it's me. It's my business. And it's been difficult sometimes for us to recognize how dependent we are on these information systems. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the cost of not properly protecting the data? You know, and as we look at this, and I use the word integrity, the state of being whole and undivided. Part of the challenge we have when I'm having this conversation with business owners and executives is, how honest are we about our security posture? You know, the word little integrity is almost oxymoronic. You can't have just a little integrity. You either have it or you don't. And as we look at this, I've had the discussion with many business owners and leaders over the years. The challenge we frequently run into is an underlying attitude and driving force that people do not want to be inconvenienced. You know, I've heard this comment made without saying it, but it's protect me, but make it easy to get to my data. Well, that's a very dangerous position to be in when you sit there and say, I want to be just a little, have a little integrity when it comes to my data. It does not work. So for whatever reason, as we look at this, too many people have not equated their logical electronic possessions to the same level as their physical possessions. I mean, we stop and think about our physical businesses to walk into: keys, access codes, locks, fingerprint scanners, alarms, locks, vaults, guards. We can go on because we don't want somebody to physically get into our building. Yet, what do we do when it comes to our personal information and our electronic data that represents us? So the challenge that we see oftentimes is that convenience trumps protection. Convenience trumps security. Our data security posture requires each of us to have an honest conversation about our actions versus our words. It's important to recognize that cyber threats are real, and far more real today than the physical security threats that we have traditionally looked to protect us. Again, I've seen more businesses in the last 30 years be broken into electronically and their data hacked or missing or destroyed than I've seen people actually have physical thieves break into their building. So again, let's look at what cyber threats, where they're coming from, and how they're actually attacking us. So again, as we look at this slide, it makes it pretty clear. Thieves are going after where the money is. The challenge today, though, is how we define money. If you look at the slide, 31.3% are finance and insurance. And surprisingly, when I looked at this slide the first time, the fact that manufacturing represented the largest next percentage, well, that's because intellectual property and the ability for our patented information, our copyrighted information, fill-in-the-blank information that represents our products and services, there's companies worldwide that would love to get it. And so more and more, the thieves are looking at how they can monetize the information. Finance and insurance is pretty clear. Our personal identifiable information, social security numbers, bank accounts, etc. But it's not just limited to that. Thieves have started to realize, cyber thieves have realized that if they can get to my intellectual property and potentially through ransomware and some other things, utilize that to extort or hold ransom that data for money. And they've been doing it very effectively. We'll talk about that a little further. And their primary modes of attack are, number one is malicious code. Malicious code may be a geek speak term, but through malware and other attacks, they're delivered through websites, through emails, through different methodologies. They embed code into your computers, into the device you're using to be able to access your systems. And they have gotten to be very, very good about how they do this. So cyber thieves continue to attack us where it's most vulnerable. But the key to this also, it's not just the big companies. So when we look at this, the latest statistics that we've seen is that small to medium-sized businesses face more severe consequences, and the attacks are increasing. It's not just the high-profile attacks that we've seen that make the headlines of the major newspapers. It is day-to-day we're seeing attacks on micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. The last statistics we saw, and these are from 2015, 1/3 of small firms have been breached in some form or another through malware or some attack that allowed them to get access to or affect the data in the systems. The last statistic is the one that's most alarming to us, though, which is the 33 versus 8%. That represents companies that were taking a casual, unprotected, or too casual, or not enough protection in their systems were at risk 33%. Companies that took full steps and measures still had an 8% risk, and that 8% is coming from one particular area, which primarily is end users who are failing to follow the processes and procedures that we put in place. So end user lack of training and end user refusing to follow prescribed measures are resulting in the majority of the successful attacks. And the number one threat today is ransomware. So let's look at the cost. Again, when we look at the business interruption, typically it's 2.2. I apologize. Somebody may need to mute out. The business interruption is 2.2 to 4.3 days, and primarily where the business interruption is coming from, and again, I've mentioned this multiple times, and you'll hear me continue to say it, is ransomware. Some of you guys may not be familiar with it, but it's called crypto lockers. The concept is someone opens up an email, and before you know it, the data on your servers, your workstations, the information you have starts to be encrypted behind the scenes, and the only way to get it unencrypted is to pay the company that, or the cyber attack individual, a ransom in Bitcoin to get the data. If you don't pay it, the only alternative is to go to your backup and restore it. And we have seen large companies where it took them days to restore all their systems. And when we think about, for your business, how long would it take to take, if you lost 3, 4, 5 of your servers and all the data that represents your business, to get it off of the backup system restored, plus all the work that has to be recreated. Huge undertaking. And the technical cost just to have someone come in and do this, ranging $3,100, $37,000. We've seen clients, have 150, 200-hour projects real quickly. And on top of all this, the penalties and fines, if it were in a medical environment, this type of breach is actually considered a HIPAA violation and subject to penalties and fines. There's lawsuits, and the worst one is reputational loss, as we don't protect our data, and we have to tell our clients, vendors, stakeholders, oh, by the way, we had an attack, we lost data. No one likes to be in that situation. It's a very embarrassing reputational hit to our companies.
Steve?
So, yes.
If you could hold on just a moment, it appears that the slides aren't advancing. Could you pass the presenter back to me for just a moment?
Yes, just a second.
Thank you. And I apologize to everyone.
I think you're the other organizer.
Yes, I am.
Did you get it back?
Okay, there. And hold on just one moment.
Did you get it back, Mary Beth?
Please excuse our delay. We'll be right back with you. Steve, please resume. I apologize for the delay.
Okay, Mary Beth, I apologize as well. I don't think we're seeing the correct screen.
Okay. Do you see the screen now?
No, we're seeing just your security posture. I'm not seeing the.
There we go.
We'll work from this one. It'll be fine. We're still seeing the non-presentation screen, but it's all right. So again, as we just look at if you could advance to the next slide. When we look at security risk, and it's not just a specific set of actions that you would take. Too oftentimes I have executives say, just make my systems work, protect me, put systems in place, but you can't do that. Security posture is a state of mind. It's not a series of tasks and systems that you put in place. It's challenging today when I have to tell individuals, for instance, a legal firm, and to tell an attorney who's billing significant number of dollars per hour that he has to actually check to see that, a mail goes out, because the systems that are scanning for malware and malicious code may impact information he receives or sends. It's becoming more and more of an end-user responsibility and taking a state of mind that we have to be always aware of the risks. So if we go to the next slide. So as we look at the 5 simple ways to protect you today, the data, just a quick acronym: AWARE, always willing to act responsibly and educate. We want to look through some of how, as we are aware, always consistently having to look honestly to implement the changes required. It's an ongoing requirement. It's not something we just stop, set, and it's in place. It's a constant responsibility to look at the changes that are required, and we have to educate our staff on how to maintain the correct posture. Next slide. And as we look at this, the always aspect and layered security, and the little diagram of the castle in the middle with the different layers, the next few slides may be technical in nature, but I think it's very important for us all to recognize the different steps that we have to take. So when we start and we look at user education, layer 1, the challenge we have in that is that, and again, if you would advance the next slide, please. 95% of the security incidents involve human error. Consistent training and reminders are required. We see companies spending thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in security systems and processes to be able to stop and analyze the data to prevent the cyber attacks, but yet we still see end users receiving emails that say your FedEx package has been delivered, click here. And they don't even stop to think the fact, I didn't order anything, there is no FedEx. And yet they click on a link, and before you know it, within 5-10 minutes, the malware is infected their network, and within an hour, we've seen entire companies shut down because a user clicked on one simple email. We have to keep end-user education in front of people, and on a consistent basis have people go through. There are companies that can actually set up test environments that will send out information on it's a test, it's a bogus email, but to see how many of our employees will actually click on the link without checking it, and we can then go back to them and say, look, here's what you just did, this is what it could have resulted in. So again, as we look at the next slide with personal devices, what's the company policy of using personal devices to access company data? And that we all have this challenge. We all have our iPhone. We all have our Android. We all have our device, our iPad, laptop, fill in the blank, that we don't want to have to carry around a company device and a personal device. So these two worlds are being blended. But yet companies, we're seeing consistently fail to take a correct posture in how they protect their corporate infrastructure against letting people bring in those personal devices inside the network. And more of what we're doing on our personal devices inside the company network, whether it be going to Facebook, whether it be going to social media sites, which are becoming more and more the target of the cyber attacks. So what steps are being taken to protect the personal device? You know, that's a question I would ask every corporate IT manager to make sure that they have a policy in place for that. And we're seeing very few companies actually have pure or very clear and concise directions on that. As we look at layer 3 with the firewall, again, firewalls are physical devices that IT companies or IT departments will place at the edge of your network to keep the internet and the outside world from being able to come in and be part of the internal world. Most of us at home, I'm going to take a moment to talk about this, we do not treat our homes with the proper amount of security. Most of us have wireless access points today with very, very small and inappropriate level of security on their homes. And for those of us who live in more dense areas, urban areas where there's just so many different people have access points around, just yesterday, it's very disturbing news, but it was a couple who the police came into their home in the middle of the day. They broke into their home and charged them with downloading child pornography onto their devices because it was coming from their IP address in their house. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a neighbor who had accessed their wireless access point and their internet and was using it to download that information. Think of the reputational hit when police come into a house just because we didn't properly protect ourselves on a personal level. You know, on a business level, obviously, most companies have a firewall in place, but yet we've seen smaller businesses have a tendency to use consumer-grade devices that they get at Best Buy or some other places instead of professional enterprise-level equipment. You know, the firewall has to be managed on an active basis. We've seen too many companies put a firewall in place 2 years ago, never update it, never put the firmware, never put the updates from the manufacturer on it. It's a useless device if you don't maintain a very active position on that. And then we've looked at layer 4 with the malware protection. And this is a little bit of more technical geek speak. I apologize, but and I can follow up afterwards with any type of questions on this. But there's multiple layers of defense against malware through OpenDNS, spam filtering, anti-malware at all levels, firewall, servers, workstation, end-user device. All of these need to be properly protected. We look at layer 5 with device patching. Most of us are familiar, maybe you're familiar with the patches. Microsoft puts these out every week. Your Apple phone, your iPad, you'll see updates come out. It's very important that people consistently keep their operating systems updated. Firmware, technical device, but all of our computers have internal systems that are not the operating system level, but lower than that, cyber attacks often happen through. In fact, that's one of the ways that Target was breached, was through a firmware update. Things such as printers, we don't think about these printers, but the printer is a very, very, printers and fax machines are the multi-function devices today are huge targets, because think about every time you copy something, scan something through that, there is actually an electronic record of that left on a hard drive. And if those devices are not protected, they're prime candidates for harvesting of very confidential information. IoT means the Internet of Things. You may start to hear about this more and more as more and more of the devices in our homes and our businesses are becoming Internet enabled, so that we can, through Wi-Fi, be able to connect to our refrigerators, our security systems, our HVAC, fill in the blank. All of these are actually representing new ways for cyber attacks to occur and to get into our network through a back door that we don't realize. And finally, just looking at our end-user devices, a discussion that frequently we have with companies is, should I use Apple or should I use Android? Apple is a much more secure environment in one respect because their code and their underlying systems are so difficult to actually get into. As obvious as you can think through the news recently, where even the FBI had a difficult time accessing a potential terrorist to get into the Apple phone. The challenge with Apple is it's a homogeneous environment with 1 billion devices worldwide. It is a huge target. If somebody ever does break it, the impacts of it will be far greater. Android is an open system. Androids are less secure than Apple, but the reason that there's not maybe as primary of a target is because there's multiple versions of Android phones out there. But regardless, your phones need to be properly protected as well when we're looking at this and patched. So as we're going down to layer 6, just realize that access methods, too oftentimes, it's things as simple as our business. We leave open ports on a wall that someone can come plug into. We have wireless access points, and this is one of the primary areas that companies forget to change. They don't want to go change their wireless access point password. It's too much of a pain. Well, we dismiss an employee, and the employee still has the wireless access point for the internal network, and you can sit outside and potentially gain access to it, or just flat out people don't provide strong enough encryption methodologies on their wireless access points. Wireless access points have improved dramatically over the last 2-3 years, and if you have a system that is older than that, we highly recommend that they be changed out. And again, just for convenience, more and more of our users are wanting remote access to our system so they can work from home. Vendors are requesting the same thing. I need to be able to access data and be in a partner with you. So we're opening up more and more methodologies for remote access and how people get into our network for convenience. We just have to be careful, again, that convenience doesn't trump our protection and our security. And then finally, just looking at passwords. This is the most basic, that we need to have password policies on all devices for all users. Password policies that say every 90 days we change our password, we enforce it with 13 characters or more with letters, numbers, special characters, etc. Time doesn't allow us today really to go through what two-factor authentication means, but more and more of the systems are providing a methodology that if I want to log in, for instance, if I want to log into my Gmail account I go to visit someone's office or house and I log on to a new PC, I have to get a code off of my cell phone. That's the only place that code is available, and type in that second two-factor authentication, that second code that says I've given them my password, but here's the second code. And if someone tried to log into my Gmail account, my phone is actually going to get notified that, hey, someone just tried to access your Gmail account. You may want to look and see what's going on. So two-factor authentication is very important. And again, education on how to create. And as we look at the next slide, this is just a simple little quick exercise I ran through with people, because people struggle with how to create a password. And this is something I've tried to encourage people. 13 plus characters. There's just, if you get that complex, it makes it exponentially harder for hackers to actually break your password. One of the things I do is just suggest to people to come up with a beginning and ending sequence. So for the example I have here, every password I have could start with my, fill in the blank with of the actual password, and end with the sequence 1 at ampersand 3 or 1 at sign 3. What I'm doing there is I've automatically introduced 5 additional characters plus a capital letter, a special character, and 2 numbers. Then I can, if I took the middle section, which is the actual password I'm coming up with, and replace letters with numbers and characters, and for example, you see I equals 1, E equals 3, A equals 4, 5 equals $, you can kind of see I'm replace letters that look like numbers. So if I combine these 2 thoughts, Sam's Club, if I were to create a password for them, would be my, and you can kind of see Sam's Club written there using the replacement of the characters above. That is a very complex password and very difficult to break. So those are simple things you can do to help you create passwords. We see too oftentimes passwords, just people flat out, they're lazy, they don't know how to do it. I hate to say it that way. We recently had a client that we came into, and we did a security scan. We had 2,500 users, and we were able to break roughly 2,000 of the 2,500 passwords within the first 20 minutes of the password attack tool that we were using. So creating passwords both on a business level and a personal level is something we all need to learn how to get better at. So again, as we look about always being aware, so then the next slide we want to look at is, you know, are we again, going back to the fact it's the state of mind versus specific action. So we talked about a lot of specific actions, but as we continue that state of mind awareness, and we look at the W of aware on the next slide, the willingness and the will to be aware of the risk. You know, how often do we do an audit and assessment of our security posture in our business? You can't do it once and walk away and say we're secure. You have to have a continual presence of auditing and assessing where you are. Thinking you're safe is not the answer. You have to inspect at all levels on a consistent basis. And most importantly, budget for the findings, because what we find too oftentimes is I've been made aware that the back door is open. Now am I willing to spend the money that it takes to actually go put and figure out how to close that back door? So if we're willing, then we need to look at the next slide with we have to act once we're aware of the risk. Once you find, have the findings of the audit and committed to creating the environment, need to be aware. We've already talked about the budget. Do you give people the authority to be able to make decisions, and when people are not following the prescribed processes and procedures, what is the result? What is the ramifications if people don't follow the rules? What are our policies and procedures? One of the things also we highly recommend, buy cyber threat insurance. It's relatively inexpensive as compared to what the cost of go back to what we showed before, 2 to 3 days loss of business, the reputational loss, lawsuits, etc. Cyber threat insurance is something we all should be looking at. And then an ongoing audit. We have to be in a position to say every year, quarter, whatever is appropriate for the business, we need to be auditing ourselves. So again, we want to always be willing to act. And then as we look at the next slide about being responsible, to stay aware of the risk, the threats are always changing, and responsibility demands accountability. You have to look who is watching for the changing threats. Small businesses, this may be more difficult. Larger businesses have security officers in place. But again, just because we're small doesn't mean that we're less at risk. We all need to recognize something, which is the threats are coming from automated, random people who are trying to get in to our systems. Whereas a thief will be looking at my house or my business, and he saw me driving a particular car, he sees my pattern that I leave at a certain time of day, etc. That is not the case for cyber thieves. This is being done on mass level from people who are overseas. Primarily, these are coming from the old Soviet states, Russian states, and China is where the primary attacks are coming from, and they're doing this all on an automated basis. So you have to have someone who is responsible for watching for the changing threats. Understand what is being watched. It changes. Just because we put in a firewall and this and this and this, we fill in all the blanks, that doesn't mean next year it's going to be the same threats in the same ways. We have to be willing to understand it changes. When is it watched? Always. We have to keep a constant guard, and that's one of the reasons why there's many companies, whether it be a managed service company like Guidant Partners or managed security, there's MSPs and MSSPs, managed security system providers, etc., who can come to help on this. Where it's watched and how it's watched, the tools, more and more of these tools are becoming available on and we need to integrate them into our strategic plan. So again, in the final is just looking at educate users so they're aware of the risk. Security is a journey. It's not a destination. It's the postures we've talked about. Most of, I've alluded to this many, many times to this presentation, which is all of the sophisticated systems we have in place can be trumped simply by end users just not following our instructions and clicking on emails too casually. A little bit of a broad brush stroke, but I've been doing this a long time. Millennials are too trusting and casual with technology. They've grown up where they always had a phone. They've always had, I can download an app, I can be here, I can be on this social media site, and they bring in technology, and they're using that technology throughout the course of their day inside our businesses. We need to recognize the fact that we have to create walls and we have to create separation. And finally, we cannot protect against that which you do not know. If you don't educate your users about how the cyber attacks happen, then they're not going to be prepared to take the steps necessary to avoid those mistakes. So again, this has been a real quick, a lot of information I've gone through in a very, very quick period, and I apologize for a few of the technical challenges we had through this. But are there any specific questions that I can answer at this time?
I do have a couple questions. The first is, how often do you recommend testing your internal and external cyber security systems?
Well, again, depends on the size of your business and the industry you're in. Some of the businesses, from a compliance standpoint, would tell you that you're going to have to do this on a more frequent basis, but at a minimum period, every year, you should be testing your systems and doing external vulnerability scans and internal vulnerability scans.
And should we be training our teams on to know what an attack looks like?
Absolutely. And as I alluded to, there's actually more and more companies developing educational systems to help this. And one of the ways they're doing this now is they actually create mock attacks, whether it be phishing type emails or social socialized attacks where they're calling in and asking questions. So for a fee, you can actually have these companies create the environment where it's testing your users, and then it gives you a report back. Hey, 20% of your users actually did click on this email, and if it had been malware, you would have been infected. So it shows the areas specifically where we need to go back and do identification or educational assistance.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, please feel free to contact your HR representative to discuss things further. And I would like to remind everyone of our next upcoming webinar, Tips for Managing a Sales Team, presented by special guest AJ Dayton from Southwestern. The webinar will be October 20th at 1 p.m. Central Time. Be watching for the upcoming flyer in the next few days. Thank you all again for attending today's webcast, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. This concludes today's webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.